Unexpectedly, Bernardo shouted out to him, "What's the time, Heronio?" Without consulting the sky, without a second's pause, the boy replied, 4 minutes till 8, young Bernardo Juan Francisco. The voice was shrill, like mocking. I am so absent-minded that I would never have given a second thought to the exchange I've just reported, and my attention not being called to it by my cousin, who was prompted by a certain local pride and the desire to seem unfazed by the other boy's trinomial response. He told me that the boy in the narrow street was one Heronio Funes, and that he was known for certain eccentricities, among them shying away from people, and always knowing what time it was like a clock. He added that Heronio was the son of a village ironing woman, Maria Clementina Funes, and that while some people said his father was a doctor in the salting house, an Englishman named O'Connor, others said he broke horses or drove ox carts for a living over in the department of Salto. The boy lived with his mother, my cousin told me, around the corner from Villa Los Laureles. In 85 and 86 we spent the summer at Montevideo. It was not until 87 that I returned to Fremantle. Naturally, I asked about everybody I knew, and finally about chronometric Funes. I was told he'd been bucked off a half-broken horse on the ranch in San Francisco, and had been left hopelessly crippled. I recall the sensation of unsettling magic that this news gave me. The only time I'd seen him, we'd been coming home on a horseback from the ranch in San Francisco, and he'd been walking along a high place. This new event, told by my cousin Bernardo, struck me as very much like a dream confected out of elements of the past. I was told that Funes never stirred from his cot, his eyes fixed on the fig tree behind the house, or on a spider web. At dusk he would let himself be carried to the window. He was such a proud young man that he pretended that his disastrous fall had actually been fortunate. Twice I saw him on his cot behind the iron-barred window that crudely underscored his prisoner-like state. Once lying motionless with his eyes closed, the second time motionless as well, absorbed in the contemplation of a fragrant switch of artemisia. It was not without some self-importance that about that time I had embarked upon a systematic study of Latin. In my suitcase I had brought with me Loman's De Viris Illustribus, Caesar's Thesaurus, Julius Caesar's Commentaries, and an unnumbered volume of Pliny's Naturalis Historia, a work which exceeded, and still exceeds, my modest abilities as a Latinist. There are no secrets in a small town. Heronio, in his house on the outskirts of the town, soon learned of the arrival of those outlandish books. He sent me a flowery, sententious letter, reminding me of our lamentably ephemeral meeting on the 7th of February, 1884. He dwelt briefly, elegiacally, on the glorious services that my uncle Gregorio Ido, who had died that same year, had rendered to his two motherlands in the valiant battle of Ituzaingó. And then he begged that I lend him one of the books I had brought, along with a dictionary, for a full understanding of the text, since I must plead ignorance of Latin. He promised to return the books to me in good condition, and straight away. The penmanship was perfect, the letters exceptionally well formed. The spelling was that recommended by Andres Bello, I for Y, J for G. At first, of course, I thought it was some sort of joke. My cousins assured me that it was not, that this was just Heronio. I didn't know whether to attribute to brazen conceit, ignorance, or stupidity the idea that a hard-won Latin needed no more teaching than a dictionary could give. In order to fully disabuse Funes, I sent him Cicero's Granus ad Parnassum and the Pliny. On February 14th, I received a telegram from Buenos Aires, voice was speaking Latin with morbid pleasure. The voice emerging from the shadows was reciting a speech, or a prayer, or an incantation. The Roman syllables echoed in the patio of hard back to earth. My trepidation made me think them incomprehensible and endless. Later, during the enormous conversation of that night, I learned they were the first paragraph of the 24th chapter of the 7th book of Pliny's Naturalis Historia. The subject of that chapter is memory. The last words were, "Ut nihil non istem verbis rederetur auditum." Without the slightest change of voice,